Let's talk Brexit with my first guest of this hour, former Foreign Secretary, former leader of the SDP, Lord David Owen. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
Now, you've been a long-standing Eurosceptic. You were campaigning along with Vote Leave. You're very much a supporter of that coming up. Just first question, do you think we are ever going to leave the European Union?
Yes, I think we will. I think the view of the British people is they want out, but they want out in a sensible way. They want out preferably by negotiation. And I think that's now the big test of Boris Johnson. Can he negotiate intelligently, strongly, carry the House of Commons? He should not come back with a deal that will be defeated again for the fourth time in the House of Commons. And I think it may be hard to come out with a negotiation. But at this stage, everybody briefs, and everybody briefs their case. And so we're getting a feeling that there isn't the momentum which one got from the Irish Taoiseach and Boris Johnson. Let's see what happens.
Well, this is the beginning of last week, it was looking very negative. By the end of the week after that meeting between Leo Varadkar and Boris Johnson, looking very positive. And then now Michel Barnier on Sunday night was briefing to say, he's the EU's chief negotiator, that actually they were going to need some more concessions from the UK. Now, as more and more concessions are as there's more criticism being mounted against what Boris Johnson has proposed, we don't have that much detail about what it is. But from the details that have come out, it does seem less and less likely that Eurosceptic Tory MPs in particular would be willing to vote for this deal. Is it likely that to get a deal that the EU 27 will accept, it's going to be something that simply won't make it through Parliament, and we are just going to be facing an impasse?
We'll go on through the night. It'll be a very difficult negotiation. I think it's much too early to call it either one way or the other. It's going to be difficult, and if he has to take extra time, he may have to take extra time. I know he's very committed, and understandably so, that the deal has got to be all carved up by the end of the month, but it may not be possible to do that. But the issue of extension, remember, you don't extend without unanimity. That's going to have to be made by heads of government. Take the Polish elections overnight. We're now seeing Poland coming back with a strong government. And one thing that Polish government doesn't want is to have a system where the EU can go behind the back of a sovereign nation. And therefore, when people say that Boris hasn't got any cards up his hands, I think he does. I think there will be some governments which will say an extension will only be given if that's what the British government want. They're not in the business of playing ducks and drakes with British politics, and at least they shouldn't be.
And yet, of course, Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, only for another couple more weeks till the end of October. But he has made it very clear, said quite clearly, if the government asks for an extension, there will be an extension.
Yes, it's not his decision, and he may not like that, but it has to be a unanimous decision of all 27 countries. And we have friends, but we also have people who instinctively want to respect a sovereign government and the authority of the elected government, and therefore are already, I think, pretty apprehensive about going behind people's backs. They've been negotiating with the Labour Party, negotiating with the Liberals. They've been all sorts of chicanery have been going on, and that's not good for the EU long term. And respecting the elected government of the day, as long as they're there, that's the primary responsibility of intelligent government in the EU. And I think some of these are not going to say this can be just automatically done because of a very strange bill passed, the Benn Act in the House of Commons, by a whole load of chicanery. It should never have been allowed to have been passed by the Speaker.
What do you think the motivations of the EU are now? Because obviously people have always said on the Leave side, and I was one of those saying this, of course the Germans and the French might argue about us, don't leave the EU, we're big contributors, but at the end of the day they want to keep free trade with us because they trade more with us than, send more to us than we send to them, in which case it's in their interest to keep free trade, and eventually sense will prevail. But there does seem to be this very strong urge to either stop us from leaving or at the very least punish us for leaving the European Union project, and sort of it's almost like we've somehow betrayed the European Union. What's the motivation of the EU right now? Do you think they are desperate for us to stay in and to want to stay? Do you think they just want to humiliate us? Do you think they do want a deal?
Let's leave the emotional words. Reality is the issue. Germany is very powerful. A fifth of German exports of cars come to this country, and they also make more profit on it than most other countries. We're heading into a very difficult economic circumstances. It looks as if Germany may go into recession. There are going to be very, very real worries about having a breakdown in talks. They don't want a no deal. Nobody wants a no deal, but that must be held on the table, and we must negotiate strongly but intelligently. And that means taking account of a lot of things. You know, America could well put up a tax on German cars coming into the United States. They let them in at the moment on 6%. We charge their cars 10%. Putting it up to 10 is also, we lost the issue of subsidizing Eurobus. There are going to be charges on that. There are a lot of things out there which are very unattractive coming up at Europe. The Eurozone is not in good shape. So Britain holds its nerve, negotiates toughly but fairly, and if it has to go to an extension, let it be an extension which the British Prime Minister asks for.
You
not
don't
one
think
imposed
that
on him.
even as a Brexiteer, you think that Boris Johnson should, on Saturday, the 19th, this coming Saturday, so-called Super Saturday, he should ask for that extension?
No, I think he should negotiate on the basis of let's get this all wrapped up. Let's get it wrapped up by the end of this month. It's in your interest and our interests, and get a settlement. The Irish issue, however, is a very sensitive and difficult issue, and the changes have come forward only in the last 4 or 5 days. It may be genuinely difficult to get a settlement, but they'll go through the night. They also stop the clock. That's another EU technique, which is actually sometimes useful. And I've watched them negotiate over 40 years, and I think they mostly want a deal with us. They realize the underlying emphasis in this country, not just the referendum, but since the referendum, people want out of the EU. They don't want us to go, but I think they've accepted we're going. They want us to go in goodwill.
Are you sure about that? Because it seems to me, certainly, maybe other EU 27 leaders might recognise that, but the European Commission seems to constantly, whether it's Guy Verhofstadt, Donald Tusk, or Jean-Claude Juncker, or indeed Michel Barnier, perhaps the most diplomatic, as you'd expect, of those four, constantly making statements about how the people of Britain want to remain and talking about second referendums.
Yes, they're totally against it. And this is their technique. They've used this twice on Ireland. They used it on the Danes. That where they had referendums which they didn't like, they first of all delayed, and then eventually they forced a second referendum. Now, we know the parties and the political parties are all manoeuvring. We've got to have an election. This is a dreadful parliament. It can't make up its mind. And so there's going to have to be a general election. But now they are using the fixed-term parliament, and before we know where we are, we're going to be told there's going to be some sort of crazy linkage of a new government taking us through. They're afraid of an election. But I think ultimately there's no doubt that common sense says we're going to have an election, and the sooner the better. And then let's hope it is decisive. It can take decisions. But in the moment, I don't think there is going to be any enthusiasm for an early election, certainly from either the Labour Party or maybe the Liberals would see advantage in an election. The SNP are the ones who want an election. They are gung-ho to get one, and they think they'll do very well out of it.
Now, you gave a recent speech at the Cambridge Union on also the state of politics, the present state of politics in the UK. I would say it could go on for some years, that speech, not just a few pages. But in it, you outlined your plan for Brexit. And this is something you have been putting forward, something you're urging Theresa May to do, and something that can still be done right now. Explain, if you can, what this plan would be.
I've been openly in favour of a transition through the European economic area.
Now explain what that is.
Not staying permanently like Norway and Iceland, staying for a transitional period, and you then decide when you go out, because all you have to do is 12 months' notice. Now, we have not given 12 months' notice to leave the EEA, and it would be perfectly possible and sensible if we get really deadlocked for Boris Johnson to say, well, we'll go out through the EEA. A lot of his own party hate it, but it's a simple way of going out, and you don't require any legislation.
Okay, now just to explain, this is the European Economic Area Agreement,
yes,
and this is the EU, is all EU countries and
plus
Norway.
3 others who are outside the EU. So you can be a member of the EEA. We sign up as Britain.
Free trade.
Yes, and you are allowed to carry on free trade, and this is a option open for us. Mostly people have left the EEA to join the EU, and therefore they've left EFTA. We'd be asking to go into the EFTA pillar of governance, not with the ECJ, stay in there for a transition, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and when it suits us, leave, which we have our right to do, And it might be a smoother way of doing it. It doesn't require any legislation.
This is the key thing. It doesn't require legislation, but also it doesn't require the agreement of the other side. And that's always been a problem with Article 50.
Exactly.
It effectively, we're asking for the agreement of the other side.
I've always wanted a negotiation where you can dictate the terms in a way, and the Norway option for us at this moment allows us to say we will leave, but we will become an non-EU member. At the moment we're an EU member, we become a non-EU member. If they refused it, which I think it would be very difficult for them to do, we would go to arbitration and we go to the Vienna courts, which is an arbitrational procedure which is basically upholding international treaties. It's a very viable exit. It's not like by the hard exiters, the people who generally want to leave without a deal. I would leave without a deal with extreme reluctance, and I think it's some way down the track, and Parliament has virtually put a block on that. This option of going out through the EEA, of which we're a member because Britain signed, nothing to do with the EU, offers a sensible way through. People will not like it. It will be the last option that Boris has, and he will only use it, if he's wise, when all other options are closed. But it allows us to honour the referendum. And we're getting to a state where there is a growing feeling in the country, and this is reflected in the Brexit Party, that this Parliament and the elite in London will not accept a referendum result, that there is a phony democracy. They say they will, but when it comes to the crunch, they're using every possible means to stop it. Take my old constituency, Plymouth. 60-40 voted coming out. This isn't even in the north with the reason why. There's a revolt against London out in the country. And if we are not careful and we don't listen to these voices, it will be a much more extreme grouping that come to Parliament.
And do you think that not just electorally, are you surprised? I mean, given what we've seen, say, in France, the Gilets jaunes on the streets and the violence we've seen there week after week, running battles with the police, are you surprised that people in Britain haven't resorted to violence and street protests on a regular basis when 3.5 years on their vote hasn't actually been implemented?
No, because I think the British people, a few hundred years ago, we would have taken to the streets with violence, but that was knocked out of our system. We have a underlying faith, I think, in democracy and basically in Parliament. It's the parliamentarians that are taxing people's commitment to it, but it's still there. And if you talk to people who vote Brexit, they now have a much more effective organisation, the new Brexit Party, and they did extremely well in the last European elections.
And as someone who started his own party, the SDP, you know about these things.
I watched the way that they have developed and the way that they have, and they will be a very serious challenge, not just to the Tory party, and the Tories know that, but the Tories, which used to be very well disciplined, have now become a rabble, frankly. They've had to have imposed discipline, and this time, if there was to be a rebellion, I think Boris Johnson would put it on the people who were the Brexiteers. Previously, it was the people who were basically the closet Remainers. But politics is under great strain and stress at the moment, and I must say I'm quite horrified the way the House of Commons behaved. Never has it been anything like this complete incapacity to make a decision. And they're held in contempt outside London.
Just finally, time sadly is against us. If there were a second referendum, a lot of people are saying that's a lot more likely. Just in one word, who's going to win?
Well, I'm so appalled by the thought of a second referendum. For example, it would legitimise Scotland having one soon. I think it would probably be won, but I hope and pray we don't use it. It would be very divisive.
Won by leave.
And deeply damaging. We should not have another referendum. You have a binary referendum. They all said that we would honour this referendum, all the prime ministers lining up now against it, except for Boris Johnson. He's in a difficult position. I think we've got to trust him to negotiate well in Brussels, and I think he will.